Underground, New York City, Albany, Rochester, Buffalo, you'll find a fusion of jazz and hip-hop. The rhythms in from the bright lights of NYC to the falls of Niagara. Every corner, every town, we're all connected, brother.
Okay, I hope everybody heard that this time. But
Joe
Lou,
loves
over
that.
to you. Over to you, Lou.
All right, Tamara, thank you very much. And hello, everybody, and welcome to the July edition of the New York Space Business Roundtable. I'm Lou Zaccarella. I'm the Director of Innovation here at Space and Satellite Professionals International. So welcome. We hope some of you are on your vacation, but wherever you are and for whatever reason you're here, you're going to be in for a treat today. So what we're going to be talking about today, obviously, are UAPs, which used to be called UFOs. And I will tell you a little bit about this subject and why we chose it today. But before I do that, I want to thank the folks who brought us here. So there they are. We want to thank our three major sponsors, Luxembourg Trade and Investment, Druva Space, and Sad Shore. They've been with us all year, and we couldn't do this without their support. And these are our supporting organizations. And again, we really appreciate their support, and we really genuinely appreciate Space News providing us with their reporters every month, and you'll be hearing from Deborah Werner shortly. And I'll leave it at that. We'll talk about September later, Tamara. Huh? In his 18 years with the New York Yankees, relief pitcher Mariano Rivera had an 8-1 record with an ERA of .70, 110 strikeouts, 42 saves in 96 appearances in the postseason and World Series. For comparison, more men have walked on the moon, 12, than touched home plate during his pitching career in the postseason.
Wow.
Why do I say this? Well, because it led many to ask whether he was in fact an alien. Many in Boston still believe he was, and I couldn't resist getting that in. Well, that fits into at least one theory about one subject today, the alien plant in human society. There are many others, far more substantive, of course, that affect you and I as industry professionals and the commercial space and satellite community. According to one of our guests today, it is the most important question that we as a species will ever ask. Are we alone? And he has written deeply and researched this topic thoroughly in his book. It's a topic that government is taking far more seriously, as our other guests will explain, than ever before. What caught our attention here at the roundtable for today's discussion was actually a sentence from the executive summary of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence here in the United States in a preliminary assessment report on unidentified aerial phenomena. This was in June 2021, and it read, "The limited amount of high-quality reporting on UAPs hampers our ability to draw firm conclusions about the nature or intent of UAPs." Really? Well, with each image and data set arriving back from Hubble and James Webb telescopes, the frivolous sci-fi culture expression of alien life, like the one you just saw, is less frivolous. There is anxiety about our place in the universe, and it impacts our human community in many ways, psychological or real or both. But it also prompts a need to examine the infrastructure of space and its policy, which we'll be getting into today. And one of our speakers has taken a leading voice right on the pages of Space News magazine and other places. So today, with you, we are going to get a clearer reckoning of the existence and nature of UAPs as this topic moves into the mainstream further and further. And we'll ask whether commercial space companies, like the ones that are members of SSPI and you, have an opportunity as we examine this phenomenon. So to start us off, we welcome Deborah Werner of Space News Magazine to share some thoughts based on her magazine's reporting. Deborah, welcome.
Thank you, Lou.
It is great to see you. And Space News has done actually some reporting, on this topic, and the reporting of, for example, NASA's notions of this. NASA has a statutory authority to look for life in the universe, along with the broad obligation in its role in aeronautics and airspace safety and the risks that are posed by UAPs. Has your reporting, or have you been thinking at all about how the private sector overlaps or relates to the NASA mandate? What are you guys looking at there as some of the significant reporting here?
Well, Space News has not done very much reporting on this topic because unless and until we find out that these unidentified aerial phenomena, formerly called UFOs, are
Right.
coming from another planet traveling through space, it hasn't been something that Space News has focused on. We don't even write very much about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. But it did get our attention with the NASA report released in last September, because that was the first time in my memory that NASA really said, we have a role to play in this discussion. And specifically, NASA said that it could use its Earth observation assets to look for local environmental conditions around these sightings. There's a lot of satellites and telescopes up there.
Yeah. What does that mean, local environmental conditions? What does that mean specifically?
Well, if there's a sighting, maybe we want to know if there was ice in the atmosphere at the time. I mean, there's so many possible explanations that we could eliminate or confirm. And also what do they see from satellites happening in the area at the time? Right.
So switching to sort of your beat out in Silicon Valley, is there any sense that this presents an opportunity to develop the kinds of technologies, again, that will quantify what we're seeing out there, or in some way enhance our ability to understand?
I haven't seen that. There's always been this bias that serious people didn't discuss this topic. And that's one of the things that NASA in its report is trying to get rid of, that stigma, because I understand that some people in the military didn't want to report what they'd seen for fear of being laughed at or thought that they weren't serious.
Really?
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah, so NASA, by taking this seriously, and the Director of National Intelligence, by taking this seriously in its 2021 report, is saying, let's bring the evidence out, let's look at it, and let's see what people have seen, because not all of it can be easily explained.
Right. Well, I'm going to ask you the question that I'm going to ask our guests. Where do you come down on this? Do you believe there is something? Are we not alone, or are we alone?
There should definitely be life somewhere. We find so many planets where we think life could exist. Now, I haven't seen evidence that life has come here. I'd love to see that. But when I say that, some people start to shout at me. So,
right. Well, not here.
It's nice to be calmly asked.
Yeah. Well, it's a discussion we're going to have calmly, isn't it? And obviously, again, our industry and the technologies and our position is unique in terms of determining this. So I think it's really important that you stay calm and continue to report on it, Deborah. And do you think Mariano Rivera was an alien?
I can think of other potential aliens. Sometimes you see someone who doesn't seem like they come from this planet.
Yes, I see a few of them at my dinner table, but certainly not any here. Deborah, thanks again. Really appreciate it. You going to take some time off this summer?
Yes, after a couple of space conferences.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they just seem to keep flowing. Well, listen, we really appreciate your reporting, and we continue to read everything that you put out in Space News. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, that's Deborah Werner. And we're going to continue this discussion now with our panel. The two gentlemen that we invited here today represent kind of diverse places on this spectrum, but both have lent their unique abilities to allowing us to have that serious, calm discussion. It is one that can lend itself to going down rabbit holes. So we'll see how that plays out today. First up is Greg Eghigian. He's the professor of history and bioethics at Penn State University here in the United States. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He's an historian of science and medicine. He's written extensively about the way science and medicine have helped shape the ways we have come to understand people and behaviors and ideas as deviant, pathological, or dangerous. And I want to ask him a little bit more about that as we move into this. We will get into that understanding of psychology later. But his focus recently turned to the history of the UFO phenomenon. He received funding from sources such as NASA and the Smithsonian, and also the American Philosophical Society for this project. In his new book, After the Flying Saucers Came, A Global History of the UFO Phenomenon, was released, I believe, this month by Oxford University Press, and you can access it. His next book will examine the history and claims of alien abduction, hence the Saturday Night Live segment that we started with. Greg, welcome to the New York Space Business Roundtable.
Thanks very much for having me here.
It's great to have you, and we know you've been covering a lot of ground lately, so we appreciate you making a stop here.
Sure.
Next up, along with Greg, is Nick Reese. Nick is a good friend of SSPI. He's also the co-founder and managing partner at Frontier Foundry. Nick served as the first director of emerging tech policy for America's Department of Homeland Security, where he advised the White House and cabinet officials on national security implications of emerging technologies. He is also the author of the DHS AI strategy, its post-quantum cryptographic transition roadmap, and the 2022 DHS space policy. He was the lead representative for the development of Space Policy Directive 5 and Executive Order 13960, which is related, I believe, to trustworthy AI in government. He's a faculty member right here at New York University, and Nick has had a decades-long career in the United States military, intelligence community, and in our homeland security. Now he's focused on bringing tech solutions to high stakes national security challenges with a very keen eye on the future and proposals for rethinking how we classify space to accommodate what promises to be a more definitive examination of UAPs and, of course, the future of the space economy. Nick, welcome back. It's great to see you.
Thanks, Lou. It's great to be here.
Well, let's just jump into this. Greg, I'll start with you. Let's start with first principles. I asked this question to Deborah Werner. Do you believe there have been UAPs or UFOs whose origin is not from our planet or species?
I would agree that we so far don't have anything close to any conclusive evidence of that. You have lots of things that, can't be explained, that leave people who are serious researchers, both in the intelligence communities and in civilian science, who will say and admit there are things that strike them as odd and anomalous that they'd like to look into more carefully. But most serious researchers would say there's nothing out there that we've seen so far that would lead one to that conclusion at this stage.
Yeah. What piqued your fascination in this subject? Because, I laid out your credentials for you, and then I think of 2015, 2016, you really started to take a real strong interest in this.
Well, for me, there were a number of things that got me here. Some of it was a kind of a return to my past when I was a child. I mean, I was absolutely fascinated with space growing up, and I spent a lot of time reading everything I could about space, but also UFOs. And so I read, on one hand, I would read Eric von Donigen's stuff about alien and ancient astronauts, but I was an avid reader of Carl Sagan and things like that. So to some extent, for me, it was a return a return to the past, if you will. But the other part of it was, I think for me, it was I was quite fascinated with the emergence over the 2000s and the 2000 teens of this sense that a lot of people were becoming ever more skeptical about science and about scientists, and about the kinds of new technologies we were inventing. And it struck me when I rethought and came back to, just happened to come back to looking into some of the UFO stuff, I thought, you know, this really in many ways was sort of the granddaddy of that phenomenon, right? The kind of questions that got raised in the heyday of the UFO phenomenon after World War II,
Right.
those questions all seem to come back and revolve around these questions of who can I trust? What are we doing? What are these people doing? And what is science leaving out? All those things were very, very lively parts of conversations all during the history of the UFO phenomenon.
Yeah, and you talk about that period after World War II, was it Swedish ghost ships, of course, the rise of the Cold War, Sputnik, and all of that. But you again look at this sort of global phenomenon and the community that formed around it. You also bring Carl Sagan into this discussion. And did it seem to you, or does it seem to you, that there was more of an empirical approach back then than there is now?
I would say I wouldn't say necessarily. I mean, I think the thing is, one of the things you find out when you start doing a more serious, rigorous history of this social phenomenon of fascination with UFOs, and you don't sit there and come into it saying, this was my approach, I'm not here to adjudicate whether these things are from outer space, or whether this is all just hoaxes, or whether this is all nonsense. I wasn't trying to do that. My interest was in trying to figure out how it took the shape that it did, how the conversations got, and the research about these things started to play out the way it did. And so you had, from a very early stage, already in the late 1940s, you had military intelligence authorities in the United States and elsewhere looking into this stuff, trying to get to the bottom of it, taking very seriously the idea that there's something going on. We don't know what it is. Very few people, I think, thought they were from outer space, but there was concern about what this was. And on the other hand, you had civilians who on their own free time were also doing this. And some took a very, very serious, deliberate, empirical approach to it. And that was really the birth of the first UFO organizations. You have very much, I think, the same kind of thing going on now, right? I think with Arrow, you have the intelligence community now saying these things are worthy of looking into very seriously because of, among other things, pilot safety. And as you had just alluded to before, NASA has at least lent some of its authority, right, and legitimacy to this topic, to encourage people and researchers to look into it in a more serious and robust fashion. So I think we're kind of, in a sense, we've almost come full circle in my estimation. It's almost, at times I've said to people, it seems like we've returned to the 1950s.
Interesting. I've got so many more questions for you, but Nick, same question to you. Let's again go back to first principles. Do you believe that there have been UAPs whose origin is not from our planet or species? And then we'll get into it further about your focus on this.
Yeah, I do. And I absolutely believe that there is life somewhere. But I think that it's interesting because anytime we have the conversation about there being life from another planet or another galaxy or something like that, we make the automatic assumption that they are more advanced technologically than we are. They're able to travel at or near speed of light. They're able to visit us. They're able to do all these things. And I think that sometimes that clouds our view of what might be the reality. And to be clear, we don't know. But the idea is, there specific types of life that can and has made it to Earth? Maybe. Is there life that's maybe in a different form, maybe less advanced than we are, or advanced in a different way than we are? I would say almost certainly. But I think that we do have to kind of like slice that the right way so that we can think about the problem the right way.
Yeah. Well, let's stay with that and talk about that DNI assessment report, the executive summary that I referred to. They said that, quote, there's a limited amount of high quality reporting, okay, on UAPs. And so, you know, as Greg is kind of saying, it does hamper our ability to draw firm conclusions. I mean, he comes at it from a journalist or a writer's point of view, researcher's point of view. You've written extensively, and I think brilliantly in space news. You've got a couple articles out there that we're going to provide links to that I think are doing some really good work in the area of rethinking space infrastructure. And we can talk about that more, but do you see a connection between DNI's need or their claim of limited high quality reporting and the ability of perhaps a retooled space infrastructure policy to provide these tools to probe the issue more knowledgeably? Is there a connection?
There is. And I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about DNI. And so this is probably going to be a little wonky and maybe certainly a lot more boring than you know, the great things that Greg said. But, you know, I think that it's important to understand structurally kind of why DNI said that. So I spent 6 years in the intelligence community, and I'm quite familiar with how DNI works and how they marshal their resources and how they do their collection. And they really base their collection around requirements. So DNI themselves do not decide what they're going to collect. That direction comes from policymakers, elected officials, cabinet officials, things like that. They put requirements out into the intelligence community. DNI then takes those requirements and assigns an intelligence community agency to figure out the answers to these requirements and then provide them back. And so I thought actually what Deb said earlier was really important, because she said that, you know, if we literally had people that were afraid to speak up and report, you know, to their supervisors the possibility that they may have seen a UAP, then we certainly didn't have a collection structure around collecting UAPs. Now, there might be some incidental collection out there, which I have no doubt exists, but I think that because we haven't kind of normalized this conversation enough, the requirements haven't followed, so the kind of collective marshaled resource of resourcing behind collecting data has not followed. And so then DNI makes a statement, we don't really have enough data. I actually very much believe that. But, you know, I think because of the subject we're talking about, everybody goes, oh, yeah, right. Yeah, right. They have it. They're just not releasing it. I actually don't think that's true. I think that no one has told them to go out and collect it, so they probably don't have it.
Okay. And you're probably right. I mean, the conspiracy idea, right? I think someone said 3 people can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead.
Right.
So, but just to follow up on that, though, what you're proposing is really a rethinking of the 17th infrastructure that we have, you know, the protected infrastructure that we have at a national level. Does this now give impetus to a more comfortable asking of the question? If the DNIs and others now can say that we want to approach this, and we won't say you're crazy if you believe it.
Well, speaking of things that I often get yelled at for, this sometimes is one of those subjects. So Deb, I totally understand where you're coming from. But you know, there's a lot of passionate feelings about space being designated as the 17th critical infrastructure sector, kind of yes or no. And it's kind of this binary thing. It's either you're yes or no. You're on one team or the other. And what my writing is focused on is actually, well, maybe there's another option. And maybe that other option is we create a space critical infrastructure model that is separate and distinct from terrestrial critical infrastructure. So instead of taking space, which is unique in any number of ways, and try to kind of fit that into an existing structure, why would we not create critical infrastructure sectors for space? So like
Right.
habitation, for example, air, or you could call it life support, things like that. Those are critical infrastructure in space, but they're not critical infrastructure on Earth. I mean, I can open the window right now and nothing will happen to me, but that's not the case in space, right? And so what I'm proposing is that we have this conversation differently, which is not to say we do not make it critical infrastructure, but we make it its own critical infrastructure. And the way that this connects to the conversation we're having right now is because when we're talking about space as critical infrastructure really gives us a framework for responding to incidents. That's why we have it on Earth, and that's what it would do in space. We are pretty comfortable with, an incident that might occur in, say, low Earth orbit, right? That has a dependency directly on Earth, right? A satellite that specifically provides some service to Earth. But what happens for a lunar mining facility, or what happens for deep space communications, or a mission to Mars, or something like that? What happens when we get that far away? What is our response? What is our response architecture? And I think that the UAP issue is actually another just great reason that we should have a specific critical infrastructure model for space and not try to fit it in as number 17 in the terrestrial space. And because we are likely to run into issues like this that will require some kind of response. And I don't mean like a military response, but I mean a response of some type. And we should have a framework for that. That framework then allows D&I to collect the right information. It allows NASA to do the right things, and it just kind of flows down that way.
Yeah, you're actually talking, and maybe we can find it and put it up in the this year's January 3rd Space News. You wrote a long piece on that about poo-pooing those binary debates. But you I think call for the development of a response agency to do exactly what you're talking about. So that sounds consistent with what you're saying now, right? That you would want that, and again, it would be helpful. Greg, I want to just again go to your work. You referred to the inability to get comfortable with conclusive data as among other things, the reasons being most of the encounters are brief, right? You're talking about what, 2 to 5 seconds. That does make it a little hard to collect reliable data, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's been the history of the phenomenon. I think when people become fascinated with the UFO phenomenon over the decades, what they really tend to glom on to are these fairly lengthy narratives, stories that involve fairly lengthy reports from witnesses who saw something that lasted for a fairly long period of time. Usually there's even a kind of a plot to it all, and it landed, and then I saw two beams and I couldn't make it out, and then they, all of this. Those are actually, historically speaking, those are very rare. Those are very rare kinds of reports. The world over, the reports that from witnesses at least have tended to be much the same thing, which is, first of all, usually it's just seen some strange lights. It's a lot of, in fact, most of the reports were typically in the early evening, and they tended to be kind of fuzzy. It wasn't clear. Was it a sphere? Was it an oval? Was it a cigar-shaped thing? And you're quite right. Most of these are very, very fleeting. And so when, for instance, in the 1960s, when Edward Condon and other scientists said that we're going to conduct the first scientific study of this stuff, Condon himself, who runs this committee, sits there and says, the problem we have is this stuff isn't like an epidemic, say. Medical researchers find out there's an epidemic, he said, you could go out and still, the epidemic was still going on. You could research it. He said, we wanted to have quick action task forces to send out into the field. He says, but you could never do that because the stuff was gone. So that kind of was always a very typical sort of mantra one heard from people who sort of lamented the fact that it just seemed impossible to ever really follow up on witnesses and their reports.
Right. So there certainly is that. Are there, you also talk about, and this is fascinating to me, the psychology of the species, even pilots, right? There is something that happens cognitively around this subject that is human, but it's kind of unlike our approach to other things, perhaps. Although you talk about UFO, if there was a sighting and it was conclusive that we'd have a UFO religion, but you also talk about being humans, we would probably, if they were superior, we would try to kill them. Where do you, I mean, again, where does the human psychology come down with regard to, again, trying to find out conclusively whether we are alone or not?
Well, I think what the historical record shows, and you think about it, it's been now a preoccupation of the world for over 75 years since that first sort of flying saucer sighting, as it was called, 1947. And what you see is really a fairly diverse set of responses to not just witnessing things, but to also reading about things, speculating on all of this stuff. You know, one of the things you have to acknowledge is that while some people, when news of this broke in 1947 and in the immediate aftermath of that, and for decades later, many saw in that really something that had to do with the turn of the millennium. They saw this as the beginning of what was called the New Age. And so it was a deeply spiritual thing for many people right off the bat, that this was a new portent of something great that's going to happen as we connect to our cosmic brothers and sisters. Other people saw in this something that was more fascinating than anything else. It was as fascinating and as maybe terrifying as what had also most recently happened, which was finding out that there was this thing called the atomic bomb that nobody had known about, right? And this new technology that seemed to maybe be something that was going to lead to our own self-destruction, right? And then you also have, it has to be said, I try to give these people a place in the book as well, a lot of people who are just sort of ho-hum about it all, whose attitude is, yeah, okay. And I think that's what you see over time, is there's a really broad response, a widely diverse response to this phenomenon that doesn't neatly fall into easy categories, that you can expect this kind of thing or that kind of thing. So yes, there's a kind of a religious spiritual dimension to this stuff, but there's, for many people, that is off the table. That is simply not where they're going to go, and they have no interest in those kinds of things.
Yeah. I recall in the year when the year 1000 came about, people flocked to the Vatican because they thought it was the end of the world. And Pope Gregory had to say, no, it's okay. You know, it's not going to happen.
Yes.
We're gonna have
Y2K. Remember Y2K?
Yeah. Early version of it. Yeah.
Right.
So Nick, as Greg says, there are a range of responses, but, you know, given your background in history and the intelligence agencies, if this did look like it was something significant, what do you think the response would be, first of all, from the government perspective? I mean, you've got that kind of jet pilot blood running through your veins. I suspect you wouldn't panic. What would the reaction be?
Yeah, I think that the initial reaction would be one of kind of assessing risks, right? Because that's what the government's supposed to do, right? The government is supposed to say, okay, we see this thing out here. Let's make sure that it's not a risk or a threat or something to us, infrastructure, things like that. Like let's have that conversation sort of first. And so I actually think that, you know, the collection of data would be extraordinarily important. And, you know, having been in kind of those roles, like you don't have forever to make decisions, to collect the data and make the decision. You have sometimes a painfully short amount of time to make that decision. But yeah, I think that what's going to shape that response is kind of how we collectively start talking about the study of this, the collection of data around it, and, you know, we sort of destigmatize the idea. Because I liked what Greg said there about how you have a certain amount of people that are just kind of like ho-hum about it, right? They're just like, I don't really care either way. And then you have kind of a set of people that are, you know, wearing the tinfoil hat, so to speak, right? So you have that set of people. And when you kind of put those two sets of people together, that's a large number. And everybody else who maybe is a little bit more open-minded says, oh geez, like I'm either like a kook or I do this. And so they sort of stay away from the conversation. If we change that, we can start doing things like, collecting data that will give us a really good, clear picture. We can put incident response frameworks in place. We can train people that are in these positions, these decision makers and their staffs, to have this conversation in a serious way, right? Like we're going to run a tabletop exercise, but this isn't just a goof off session. We're being real about this, and we're identifying real gaps. And so I think that, how we proceed with this issue is going to determine how our government responds, right? Because that's going to be a reflection of us. And the more that we can kind of equip those people with the right data and kind of the, I guess I'd say, intellectual freedom to, think deeply about the issue, the better off that we'll be.
And that leads us to something I wanted to talk about for our members, which is the business opportunities, commercial business opportunities, right? Do you, I mean, you're talking now about something that would evolve into at least entrepreneurial activities, if not full-fledged business opportunities for, the ground segment providers, the telemetry providers, the satellite operators. Nick and Greg both, I'll stay with you for a second, Nick. Do you see business opportunities potentially emerging as we continue to go down this path?
Sure, I sure do. And I think that it probably starts at a place of just like workforce education, like being able to bring people in and understand this issue in a real way, and not in a what I saw on TV last night kind of way, like a real understanding of the issue. And I think, particularly coming from the kind of biological standpoint with some of this stuff, really important. And then I think what that'll do is that'll then allow people within your organization to say, read about some new findings or collect data collection or something like that, and understand it in a real way. So I think that there's really good educational opportunities here. But I mean, I think the gap that we're really seeing technologically is there aren't a lot of sensors that are pointed kind of outward that are specifically doing this. Now, sure, there's SETI and organizations like this that do that at some level. But when is the last time that we really put kind of our most technologically advanced equipment and really, kind of pointed it at this problem? And so, here there are business opportunities to kind of be the person or the organization that's able to collect a lot of this data and provide it back to DNI or make it available publicly or kind of whatever the business model is. But I think that, especially for kind of hardware sensors, and then I would say probably also artificial intelligence to analyze the data, there's quite a bit of opportunity there, because right now that's just a gap, and DNI said so.
Yeah, Greg, you're nodding your head as Nick's going through this. You also mentioned in an article, Greg, a couple of years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, about a DoD program that did put UFOs back on the government map. So maybe you can sort of pick up on what Nick was saying. Have you examined business opportunities or financial impacts from this based on DoD's program, or again, what Nick was elaborating on?
No, all I can say is that what Nick was saying, I can only echo that. This is what I'm hearing from colleagues of mine who are very interested and believe this needs to be looked at and studied very seriously. That you need better, more refined sensors, but you need sensors exactly pointed in the right direction. That AI seems to be a very, very promising new way to approach things. I think here, particularly the work being done at the University of Würzburg by Hakan Kayal, who's very interested in the use of AI for just that very purpose here. I would add one more thing that's maybe on the, whether you want to call it humorous side or not humorous side for financial opportunities, is I think you'd also have to be aware that there's always going to be people who see this as an opportunity at, let's call it playing the confidence game, right? There's a history of this in the UFO business. I'll give you one example from the 1950s. Was a group of guys who late 40s, early 50s, actually convinced this journalist that they had or had convinced a bunch of people that they had invented this new thing called a doodle bugger. And what the doodle
A doodle bugger.
And what the doodle bugger could do was, you've heard of divining rods that could detect water. Well, the doodle bugger could apparently find oil, which would make anybody wealthy, right? And then so people wanted to know, well, where did you get this device? And they claimed they got it from a spaceman. I think they said it was from a spaceman from Venus, and they told the story to a journalist who bought into it. They were later exposed, convicted of fraud and all these things. But that's not an altogether uncommon thing, is the problem you have in this area where there's so much kind of wild speculation and a lot of different ideas can be thrown around, and a lot of people are very receptive. It does provide, unfortunately, a lot of opportunities for people who are maybe a little more unsavory to exploit those opportunities. Something I think you always have to be aware of. I mean, you have to take that into consideration, I think, right?
Yeah, well, you also talk and write about the sort of the X-Files theory, which is out there, that they have arrived, they have met with government officials, and there's been an agreement, right? That in exchange for abductions, which you're going to be writing about in your next book, they've given us all this great technology and weaponry. That's something else, but that's not really a doodle bugger.
No, that's not a doodle bugger.
My new word for the day.
Better than a doodle bugger, that's for sure, right? That kind of story gets minted at a particular time. It's one that starts to emerge over the course of the 1970s and 80s. So it's a kind of a latecomer to the discussion. And again, it begins as really just rampant speculation on the part of some people, but then again in a pattern you see repeated over and over in the UFO world is you then have people coming forward saying, well, hold it, I have it from some very good sources, or I actually saw this stuff, or they gave it to me. I have the plans, and then they were stolen, or somebody. And what typically happens in this kind of recycled narrative is that the meat, right? Show me the meat, show me the beef. Where is that conclusive evidence? That just always ends up sort of somehow somewhere else. It's somebody else has it, somebody else took it, or it never really emerges. And so it creates a frustration. Of course, it makes some people become completely really cynical about the whole UAP UFO conversation. But it also, strangely enough, the other thing is it helps perpetuate the mystery. And the mystery is the thing, from at least a social and cultural perspective, that keeps this thing alive.
Yeah, that's a great point.
The mystery is the key to all that.
Yeah, that's such a wonderful point. And again, it goes back to human psychology, right? If we can't explain it, it continues to grow in our minds as we ponder it. Gentlemen, we're at the end of this segment. We're going to pick it up with a big question on the after hours segment at 1 for about 10 or 15 minutes. But before we do that, we've got a few things to do, including hearing from Mr. Joseph Fargnoli of the New York Space Alliance. Joe, what a conversation.
Absolutely. Two really powerful guests. I really want to thank Nick and Greg for joining us today. When we look at topics like this, and this was kind of a topic where we're pushing the edge a little bit, we have to stand back and look at the state of our society and consider the degree of anxiety that we live under today. Combine anxiety with some curiosity, and a lot of great questions come up. I really appreciated what Nick said about destigmatizing the investigation in UAPs, and what Greg said about basically the same thing. There's really an encouragement here of bringing to bear hard, objective, scientific investigation. It's fun and games to talk about green men and tinfoil hats and everything, but let's keep this in the realm of objective scientific investigation. And the reason why I say that is because intuitively, one of the things that I have found, and many of us have found, is that every time we imagine something, eventually it finds fulfillment. I'm hoping this is true in the Buffalo Bills' quest for a Super Bowl championship. But in this area, we may not have little green men visit us, but there may be other forms of effective life that are real. but must be subject to hard scientific investigation. So although I'd like to laugh this topic off, in fact, I thought this was a crazy topic for us to take on, it's very worthy because we know that somewhere in our imagination is the possibility of this coming to fruition. In fact, I put a quote in the chat from a source that I often refer to, from the writings where it says, "Know thou that every fixed star hath its own planets, and every planet its own creatures, whose number no man can compute." Now, what form those creatures take, I don't know. But when I think about the diversity of life on this planet, and when I think about the various realms of physics that exist in the universe, would it be a surprise to have effective forms of life that are indistinguishable from what we expect to see as life? Scientifically, I've got to leave that option open. So this idea of also capturing the human imagination, and I think about my understanding, and I may not be totally correct, of the founding of SpaceX and Elon's interactions with the Mars Society, and a bunch of semi-questionable people in the mid-90s who were thinking about how do we propel human life on Earth. And there was a need from that for vastly decreased costs of launch, which I believe played a factor in the establishment of SpaceX. So the power of the human imagination is really very important to consider here. I hate to say it, but I like the phrase, believe it and then you will see it, right? Believe that there's a better world out there, brought to you by satellites and other technologies, and then we'll start to see where some of that comes to fruition. Now, the reality is it would not take very much for other forms of life to be more advanced than ours in reality, especially with what we see going on today. But I've read another quote that reads, "Beings who inhabit those distant luminous bodies are attuned to the elements that have gone into the composition of their respective spheres." So we should not be looking for things that look like what we see right now. And our history, if you go back 100 years or 200 years, no one would imagine the lives that we're living right now, how we communicate, how we travel, how we create. So we want to leave our imaginations open, but also be firmly rooted in hard scientific investigation. My next point is, so what? What does it matter? Well, what matters today is how much money do we spend exploring this? And I think this goes back to Nick's point about policy. Should that amount be zero? Probably not. Should it be the gross domestic product of a large nation? Probably not either. But what is that right amount that we should spend? What's the right amount we should spend in contingent defensive positions in case there is something out there we should be concerned about? So in a sense, there is, because again, we're all about space entrepreneurship here. There is an opportunity for private entrepreneurship. Is there enough evidence in an area to justify the establishment of a non-doodle-bugger business to provide an effective role in exploring or defending these potentialities? So although it sounds funny, I think there is a realm of really early adopters considering, where can entrepreneurship play a role, where government may be skeptical, where established industry may be skeptical. Where do entrepreneurs come forward in areas that seem totally crazy, but have hard scientific foundation, are firmly credible, and have viable potential market plans? I don't have any of those in mind, but we need to keep our eyes open to them. And lastly, think about the value of finding extraterrestrial life and giving the Yankees what they need to beat the Red Sox and the Bills what they need to beat the Chiefs. That should justify any business case.
And on that note, yes, very good, Joe, as usual. I think the Bills need to bring in not little green men, but the big blue linebackers from Penn State or something. Yeah. But it's a great point. And to unlock the imagination, again, we go back to what Nick was saying. Let's build the proper infrastructure to enable it, right? And that's always been the case of entrepreneurship. If we can build the right infrastructure, then we enable the great creative minds of business to continue to flourish. And there is that element in what you were saying. So again, thanks so much for taking us up to that level. Again, before we go to the big question for our guests, and we are going to open the floor to questions, there've been some great comments here in chats, and we really appreciate it. Deborah, you dropped in a few chats, reading material. We've also, by the way, dropped in a link to Greg's book. But we've got to do a few seconds of housekeeping here. So Tamara, I see you've got me queued up. What's going on August 15th? What's this open mic thing? You guys taking the mic away from me?
Pretty much, yeah.
Can't do that.
Yeah, listen, we're inviting our friends in the roundtable far and wide, but especially if you're in New York, we especially want to hear from you. We're inviting you to tell us a little bit about what your business is doing. Specifically, we want to know what your business is doing now or will do in the future to make the world a better place. As you know, the roundtable is part of SSPI's Better Satellite World campaign, which is all about articulating and demonstrating the value of space and satellite technologies to the world. And you are all a part of it. So we want to hear from you. Everybody's that wants to come and be a part of it. We want to know that. And everybody will get 7 minutes to tell us about what you're doing. So I will put the link in the chat as soon as I'm not showing slides as to how you can sign up for that. I really hope people do take advantage.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to that one. We've got an SSPI WISE meeting. Of course, SSPI WISE is our Women in Space Engagement interest group. And what's happening there? It's next week, huh, Tamara?
Next week, Thursday, 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern. Our mentoring working group is bringing us resiliency in uncertainty, how to manage your path through an environment of mergers and acquisitions. So if you've ever lived through that in any way, shape, or form, you know how nerve-wracking it is. We know that there's so much change and there's so much anxiety. We're going to have a conversation about how to navigate through that moment.
Very good. Is there going to be a speaker, guest speaker there?
There will be a panel of folks who will kind of give some guidance and mentorship to everybody who shows up. So this is one of our meetings. It is an all members meeting. That means everybody can come and contribute, but it'll be, of course, led by our mentorship working group.
Okay, and how can people sign up for that if they're not part of WISE?
Yeah, wise.sspi.org. Click on wise.sspi.org. You will see the link to go and sign up. It's just like the roundtable. There's a link that will last for a couple of months and get you registered for the events. And we'd love to see you there.
Yeah, and SSPI WISE is our fastest growing part of the organization. So we encourage you to be a part of it and be a part of SSPI. You can become a member, a corporate sponsor, or just contribute your time.
Absolutely. And
in September, we're going to be live in 2 different places at 2 different times. In September 18th, we're going to be up in Cornell University for a roundtable where we're actually going to be talking about how New York State can become a space economy and pull together all of the many assets like the Nick Reeses of the world that are here and all the financial assets and technological assets. And so we'll be up there having a roundtable for a day. We really encourage you to sign up for that. And that takes place on the 18th. And we'll have a keynote speech from Voyager Space and a lot of other things going on thanks to our friends at the New York Space Consortium for Technology. Tamara, they can sign up for that now, can't they?
yes, they can.
SSPI.org. /events. You'll see it on September 18th. And I'll be in London on September 30th for our London Space Business Roundtable, where we'll have Astroscale, Willis Tower Watson's, Hogan Lovells, and others, and a member from the new Labour government there, talking about policies and programs and opportunities for space sustainability. What is the UK going to do to step forward and make sure that space is both safe, sustainable, and part of their national plan to develop more market share for the industry? And that's always a heck of an event. Hogan Lovells hosts it, and boy, we have a great time, and there's some terrific champagne flowing there at the end. So if for no other reason, come for the champagne. And Greg and Nick, you're both welcome. Tamara, why don't you take us through SBQ, the business of space, and what we're doing with the Global VSAT Forum?
Yeah. So as our regulars know, SSPI about a year ago, a little bit more, launched what we call Space Business Qualified. It's an online training program that we developed in conjunction with GVF and SAPROF. to give us the ability to understand our industry in a more broader way. So we know that we come into the industry in different ways. We come in marketing, we come in business, we come in as engineers, but having an overview of what the industry really is about, what is the business of space, of course, will make us more effective in our jobs. And so Space Business Qualified was born to fulfill that need. Happy to report that because of the success of Space Business Qualified and the deep roots of the GVF training platform, we've been able to negotiate to have those two platforms put together. So if you sign up for the GVF training, or if you already are signed up for GVF training, you can upgrade to just include Space Business Qualified. That is all one package now that you can take advantage of. So
Yeah, and that's new. So again, if you're a mature company or a startup company, and you've got employees that are coming from outside the industry, I mean, this is a very specific type of industry, and it's important for them to understand the business of space and even the history of it. So this is a great opportunity for them to take that training and to be certified.
with that,
Okay.
I think we're all done.
Yeah, we're back to the questions. I see a couple of comments here from Christopher Ulrich and others. And Tamara, why don't you ask people if they would be willing to come on and speak? And that includes Deborah Werner, if she is willing to come back on as part of this conversation. But I'm going to ask the after hours question, the big question, first to Nick and to Greg. Nick, if they came and we could prove it, CNN was covering it, what would you want to see as the headline?
Excellent. That's a great question. I think I would want to see a headline like a couple weeks in advance, letting us know they're coming, that we've detected that they're coming. And not just that we on the day of arrival, because again, that would go back to the infrastructure, data collection, education piece that we were talking about before. And then I think, if it was day of, I think I would want to see a headline that said something like first contact made, and then sub headline, something along the lines of, communication in progress, or communication, figuring out how to communicate with them. So I think that's what I would like to see, is something like that. But I think the one that I would see is more important is the headline that's like a month ahead of time.
Yeah, little heads up. Greg, how about you? You're nodding your head. If you were writing the headline, what would Professor Eghigian say?
I'm not good at headlines, but I probably would also like to see something along the lines of instead of big declarative statements, some open-ended questions, right? What next?
That'd be the headline in the New York Post, by the way.
Yeah, right, exactly. What next? Who's in charge? Because of course, the other aspect of this is, I think it would be inherently, the nature of things would be for individual countries to have sort of start to map out their responses. But you'd like to see some sort of coordination on the part of multiple nations, right? You'd like to see some sort of global response. So I'd love to see something that also makes at least some gesture in that direction of what's next for the world along those lines.
Yeah. Greg, just quickly, I was watching one of your other interviews for the book, for your new book, and you were saying, you were agreeing with, I think, the questioner who was saying, what's always important in these things is to try to ascertain intent. And that has always got colonial powers into trouble. It gets human beings and marriages in trouble. That's probably job one, isn't it? Isn't that the scariest part, that we really wouldn't be able to ascertain intent? Did your research reveal anything that might make that easier? And I'll ask Nick, and then we're going to bring some people on to talk.
Yeah, it's actually a great, and I would argue a extremely complicated question, because the other part of it, and I think this gets to something that Nick referred to earlier in our conversation, is the question of to what extent can we even attribute any notion that we use to talk about intent to other kinds of advanced beings. I mean, if we think their morphology, if their bodies will be quite different from our own, surely what we would call psychology would also probably be quite different. So a colleague of mine actually is looking into this question of all of these assumptions that go into things like intent or feelings or morality. Do our categories of morality, intent, cognition, feeling, do those things even map onto any advanced civilization that we would encounter? That would make it even doubly difficult for us because we wouldn't even know where to begin. So it's a really, really thorny question, I think.
It really is. We'll bring in Steven Spielberg on that one. He's here in New York. Nick, quickly, what do you think?
Well, I think that you're absolutely right on in terms of like how we view the concept of intent and things like that. So complete agreement there. But I will give just, sort of another flavor on that question, which is, I think one piece of intent that I would want to make sure that we looked at and understood was, did they intend to actually come here at all? Or was it happenstance? Was it an accident? Was it any other number of things? Because that right there, I mean, in some ways might actually be more likely, but would cause us, because we frame things in terms of intent, risk, threat, vulnerability, right? We frame things like that. We might our response might be driven by something that we view as kind of like hostile by our definition, but was in fact just kind of a happenstance or an accident. And so I think that's kind of one side. And then the other side I would encourage people to think about is look at the measures that we've gone to communicate our peaceful nature with things that we put onto long-range probes. And so, we've put the plaque on that has, the form of the man and the woman and the hydrogen atom and, the record with all of the songs and the sounds from the earth and stuff like that. We went to painstaking lengths to make sure that if something found that in the future, it would know that it was peaceful. That's a great point. To the best that we can, to the best of our ability. And so I would encourage us to also look inward a little bit and ask ourselves, what have we already done in this kind of case on the off chance it happens, not even if we do it intentionally?
Yeah, that's a great point. Mozart will probably do more to assuage hostile intent than anything I can imagine. Well, listen, guys, thanks a lot. We got 4 minutes left, and I know we've got some people who want to talk to you. Adam Page, do you want to come on and make a comment or ask a question? There he is.
Well,
hey, Adam.
Give me a minute. Let me let him unmute. Let's hear.
Adam, why don't you just quickly tell us?
All right, there you go, Adam. Yep, you're in.
Manchester in the UK. How is everybody?
Doing great.
Right.
Thanks
Fabulous.
for coming on.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been looking into this for a long time, and I just wanted to make a couple of comments based on what has been said so far. I think it's a really good session. There's been like some good conversation about the context around the whole UAP thing, but I think the one thing so I come from a company called Supernova Labs, and we're trying to build a space plane in the northwest of the UK, and we'd like to get to a point of single stage to orbit, but in order to do that, even if you're using the best rocketry, the best engineering you have available, you still need something on the top half of Starship to get there, and that's with no payload to orbit. So it's not feasible to build something like that. So we need to build mass reduction devices. That's what got me into UAP in the first place. Now I'm more focused on the engineering side of things because it would be cool if there were aliens, but the reality of it is, how do I do that? Because that's what really matters to me. And I would like to be able to do this mass reduction, like flying around with 100G maneuvers. And what is the context that I can glean from the evidence that's out there? And there is anthropological evidence with all talk about getting sunburns from these things. So it might be a UV component, might be a plasma component to the whole thing. But what has been coming out of a lot of the conversations is a distinction between what people talk about as alien vehicles and alien reproduction vehicles. So things that we as humanity have been able to glean and build as part of these black projects. And it tends to, from what I've seen from the diagrams that I've been able to find, it's a lot of high kilovolts equipment, typically with a DC rectifier in the middle. So like you'd have a mercury spinning mercury things like a DC rectifier, basically to build like big pulsed fields. So what I've done is I've linked a couple of videos. So there's one video from APEC, it's the Anomalous Propulsion conference. They're trying to bring together theoretical physicists and experimental physicists to actually like drill down into what we can actually learn from all this. And there's been some alleged crash debris that they're covering in that video, but also another video under that goes over the RF circuitry of cyclotrons. So what some of the first particle accelerators that we developed, and functionally, the electronics are the same. So it's based on resonance circuitry. And the basis basically is that gravity and electromagnetism are the same thing. To put it in a really neat point.
You got about a minute, Adam, because
No, that's right. This is the last thing.
We're going to go home here.
So if you think about gravity and magnetism, right? So a magnet is like a laser in that it's point-like, but directional, whereas gravity is like a light bulb. So it's diffuse, but the same power. So like like a 1 watt laser would burn through your hand. A 1 watt light bulb wouldn't even light up a room. So that's the functional basis of it.
Okay. All right. Nick, you want to comment on that? You're not an engineer, but anything there?
Well, I'm just glad there are people out there like Adam that are thinking big thoughts and thinking about how to do things like this. So please keep going and let us know how we can support and write the right policies to keep you in business.
There you go. And Adam, maybe we'll see you in the UK on September 30th in London at Hogan Levels. You can register now. Tamara, that's all the time we have. I just wanted to thank Nick and Greg and Deborah Werner and everybody, Adam and everybody who joined us today for what I thought was a fascinating discussion. Joe Fargnoli, of course, but guys, this was terrific. I really enjoyed it. And don't forget to buy Greg's book. And he's got another one coming up, and we'll have him back to talk about that. We'll see you next month. Tamara, you want to sing us off the air?
No. No, I promised to do that for the open mic. So
all right. Well,
show
listen,
up and they'll be singing.
Thank you to Tamara and the team, Ari, for putting this together. It's one of our best shows.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Take care, everybody, and keep
Okay,
looking
bye-bye.
out.